Hello anatomy students. This is the last video for Unit 5, Module 2, and now we're talking about the spinal cord. These are the objectives. Explain the function of the spinal cord. Explain the composition and functions of the dorsal and ventral nerve roots. Describe where the white and gray matter is located in the spinal cord and what they are composed of. Explain the function of the ascending and the descending tracts. So here's a diagram that shows spinal cord structure. There are two bulges where the spinal cord thickens. The first one is here in the cervical spine, and the second one is in the lumbar area. If you take a look at a cross-section of the spinal cord, the very first thing that you need to do in order to answer questions about it appropriately is to figure out which side is the anterior side and which side is the posterior side. The anterior side has a fissure or a crack right in the center of it. It's called the anterior median fissure because it's in the front, so it's anterior. It's in the middle, median, and it's a crack, so it's called a fissure. On the posterior side, you have a sulcus, the posterior median sulcus. A sulcus is not as deep as a fissure, but it's still a separation. So fissure front, that's how I remember where the front of the spinal cord is. And that's going to be where this arrow is right here. All right, so you'll notice that we have nerves that enter and exit the spinal cord itself. And so once again, this is the body of the spinal cord. And we have a spinal nerve that separates into a dorsal root, and it also separates into a ventral root. There's a swelling in the dorsal root that's called the dorsal root ganglion. A ganglion is comprised of neuron cell bodies or cell somas. Now remember that sensory information from the environment travels through the spinal nerve and to the dorsal root ganglion, and then it travels on into the spinal cord. Sometimes the sensory neuron will synapse with an interneuron inside of the spinal cord, and sometimes not. Sometimes it'll synapse directly with a motor neuron. In this picture, it's synapsing with an interneuron. And then the interneuron synapses with a motor neuron cell body. The motor neuron cell body is going to travel out of the spinal cord via the ventral root and carry motor impulses through the spinal nerve and then out to the body. So the spinal nerve is where the dorsal and ventral root merge for a little bit. The spinal nerves are pretty tiny. They're not very long at all. So they're just going to merge for a minute, and then they're going to separate and go on their merry ways. So, but remember that the dorsal side carries sensory information in, and the ventral side carries motor information out. All right, so the nerve roots are simply bundles of nerve fibers that are bilateral to the spinal cord. As I said, the dorsal nerve root carries sensory information. You have the cell bodies of these sensory neurons, or the afferent neurons, in the dorsal root ganglia. The ventral nerve root is carrying motor information out of the spinal cord, and the cell bodies of these efferent neurons are found in the gray matter of the spinal cord. Remember that the spinal nerve is where the dorsal and the ventral roots merge for a moment. We talked about this in the last lecture, but the spinal cord doesn't fill the entire spinal cavity. It's going to end around lumbar vertebrae 1. So it's going to end right here where our red arrow is pointing. And this little end piece here actually has a name. It's called the conus medullaris. And then it's going to branch off into thin little nerve roots, and it looks like a horse's tail, and that's why it's called the cauda equina. Cauda means tail, and equina means horse in Latin. And then it's going to end in the phylum terminal, which is found within the cauda equina. So the phylum terminal is just a thin filament of pia mater that extends down the length of the vertebral cavity. The gray matter of the spinal cord is found on the inside of the spinal cord, and the white matter surrounds it. And I just want to point out that this is opposite to the brain. In the brain, the gray matter is on the outside and the white matter is on the inside. But there's a couple of other structures that you should know about the gray matter of the spinal cord. It forms this H-like structure, or it looks like goalposts, or I don't know, to me it looks like a butterfly. The ventral horn is the bump that's found on the ventral side, or the anterior aspect of our spinal cord. So this is the ventral horn, and so is this over here. Then you have a bump that's off to the side called the lateral horn, one on each side. The central canal is filled with cerebral spinal fluid, and that's the hole that's in the center. The dorsal horn is on the dorsal aspect of our gray matter. And the two halves of the gray matter are connected by this straight portion in the center called the gray commissure. I just wanted to point out that the dorsal horn is continuous with the dorsal root of the spinal nerve, while the ventral horn is continuous with the ventral root of the spinal nerve. White matter surrounds gray matter. In each half, left and right, the white matter is divided into three sections, which are called funiculi. They are termed anterior, lateral, and posterior, so you know exactly what their positions are. Each of them contains bundles of axons, and since they're white, they are myelinated, and since they are in the CNS, they are called tracts, not nerves. So you don't have to know the specifics of this picture. I just wanted to give you a schematic to show you where the motor tracts are, which are shown here in red, and where the sensory or the ascending tracts are, and these are shown in blue. And so like these are, here are the posterior funiculi, lateral funiculi, anterior funiculi, and they mirror the funiculi that are found on the other side, or in the other half of the spinal cord. The function of the spinal cord is, number one, to serve as the integrator for spinal reflexes. We learned about reflexes in our last unit, and the integrator is the place where meaning or a decision is made about what to do with sensory information that's coming in. It's also going to provide conduction routes for the brain. And as I said, the ascending tracts are going to send sensory information to the brain, up to the brain. So that's why they're called the ascending tracts. And then the brain is going to send motor impulses down through the spinal cord so that it can exit out to the body. Remember that in the central nervous system, in the CNS, tracts are bundles of axons. One other thing about tracts that I wanted to mention is that structurally, they all originate and terminate from the same area. So you're not going to get like a neuron from the left and a neuron from the right and one from the middle creating one tract. They're all going to originate and end in the same place. The other thing about tracts is that they're all going to serve one general function. So you're not going to have some neurons performing one function and other neurons performing another. All of the neurons that are located in a single tract will perform one general function. So it's very specialized. And then this is just a review of reflex. Remember that you can have a direct synapse between an afferent and an efferent neuron, or you could have a 3-neuron reflex arc where interneurons, which are found in the gray matter of the spinal cord, make the connection between the afferent and the efferent neurons. All right, here are some checkpoint questions. Number 1, what is the function of the spinal cord? 3, 2, 1. You're going to transfer information to and from the brain, and it's going to act as an integrator for spinal reflexes. Number 2, what fibers are found in the dorsal nerve roots? 3, 2, 1. So since information is entering the spinal cord through the back, this is going to be sensory information. Number 3, where is the gray matter in the spinal cord? 3, 2, 1. It's in the center. So this is opposite the cerebral cortex. The gray matter for the spinal cord is in the middle, and the white matter is on the outside. And then you have the subdivisions of the white matter. Now remember, these are all called funiculi, and they're named according to their position. So what are their 3 positions? 3, 2, 1. That would be anterior, posterior, and lateral funiculi. What is the function of the ascending tracts? 3, 2, 1. To carry sensory information up to the brain. And the descending tracts are going to do what? 3, 2, 1. Transmit motor information from the brain to the body. That's all I have for you, anatomy students. I'll see you soon.